Tonight, we uncover a chapter of history the Vatican tried to bury beneath centuries of silence. A story of gods older than the Bible, condemned not for their evil, but for their wisdom. When the conquistadors stepped onto the shores of the New World, they believed they had found a land ruled by demons. But what they truly found were gods of light, balance, and creation, erased by fire and fear. The Church said it came to save souls, but what if it came to silence something far older, something it could not control? The Aztec gods were never devils. They were keepers of cosmic truth, guardians of a universe where every heartbeat, every sunrise, every sacrifice kept the world alive. Yet to the priests, these teachings were too dangerous, too familiar. Gods who mirrored Christ, a serpent who brought wisdom instead of sin, a mother who gave birth to the divine. It was not heresy they feared, but resemblance. So their temples burned, their books turned to ash, and their names were rewritten as curses. But history has a strange way of remembering. In the carvings beneath Mexico's cathedrals, in the songs whispered through centuries, in the symbols that still hide behind the saints, their stories remain. The gods were not destroyed, they were disguised. The feathered serpent became a devil, the sun became a sinner's fire, the mother goddess became the virgin in a blue mantle. The same faces, the same stories, hidden in plain sight. The Vatican called them demons, but perhaps they were something else. Teachers, messengers, echoes of a wisdom the world was not ready to hear. And now, 500 years later, their voices are returning, not from temples or altars, but from the stones, from the art, from the consciousness of those who remember. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, because tonight we are not telling a story of devils and saints. We are opening a vault of memory buried beneath cathedrals and centuries. A story of gods the Vatican feared not because they were dark, but because they were mirrors. Mirrors that reflected the truth of the divine, long before the cross ever touched the New World. And if what they reveal is real, then the question is not who the demons were, but who decided they should be called that at all. They came wrapped in sunlight and iron, their ships tearing the horizon like blades through the sea. To the Aztecs watching from the shore, these were no ordinary men. They glimmered beneath the sky, faces hidden by metal masks, carrying banners marked with crosses. Some believed they were gods returning from the east. Others whispered they were omens of the world's end. But to the conquistadors, this land was a battlefield of souls, and they were here to claim it for heaven. The year was 1519, and Hernan Cortés led his army not just for gold, but for God. Or so he said. Behind their prayers and polished armour hid another hunger, one that glowed brighter than faith. The first thing they saw was not gold or temples, but colour. The Aztec world exploded in reds, blues, and golds brighter than the Sunday. Markets buzzed like living creatures, canals shimmered with jade-green water, and towers rose from the earth like mountains built by gods. It was unlike anything Spain had ever seen. To them, it was paradise built by pagans. As the Spaniards marched through the humid air, priests held up crosses, chanting prayers to ward off the devil. To them, every drumbeat, every painted idol, every chant of the Aztec priests was a sign of Satan's reign. Yet, in their eyes, the Aztecs saw something else entirely. These newcomers were pale ghosts, trembling under their own armour, whispering to a god who demanded their enemies' souls. The two worlds met not with peace, but with confusion. When the Spaniards saw the temples, the altars stained with blood, they called it evil. When the Aztecs saw the cross, the bleeding man nailed upon it, they asked if this was their god of death. Neither side understood the other, yet both believed they were right. The conquistadors claimed they brought the light of Christ to a dark land. But what they found was a light of another kind, a civilization guided by its own stars, its own gods, and a cosmic order that reached back to the dawn of time. To the Aztecs, the universe was alive, pulsing with sacred energy. Every sacrifice, every ritual, every prayer kept the balance between the earth and the heavens. To destroy one was to destroy the other. But to the Spaniards, this was sin, and sin must be cleansed. So began the holy war of faith and fire. The soldiers raised their swords not just against warriors, but against gods. Temples burned, idols shattered, and the smoke of centuries rose to the sky. The drums of Tenochtitlan fell silent, replaced by the ringing of church bells. The soldiers believed they had conquered evil, but beneath the ashes, something ancient stirred, watching in silence as a new religion claimed its throne. The light of Christ had arrived in the new world, but so too had the shadow of what it sought to destroy. When the Spaniards first saw Tenochtitlan, they thought they were dreaming. Rising from the mist-covered lake, the city looked like it had been built by gods, not men. White stone temples glowed beneath the morning sun, their steps lined with banners and flowers. Canals cut through the city like veins of silver, carrying canoes filled with traders, priests, and children, laughing in languages the Europeans could not understand. It was cleaner, brighter, and more alive than any city they had ever seen. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortez's soldiers, wrote that even the grandest cities of Spain could not compare. Yet, as they crossed the long causeway leading into Tenochtitlan, wonder began to twist into unease. The air carried a strange scent, a mix of incense, flowers, and something metallic. Drums echoed from the great temple at the center, their rhythms slow and deep, like the heartbeat of the earth. The Spaniards passed gardens blooming on rooftops, markets bursting with gold, feathers, and cacao. But above all this beauty, smoke rose from the temple pyramids, dark and heavy, curling into the blue sky. They did not know that this was sacred smoke, carrying prayers and the breath of sacrifice to the gods. To them, it was the smell of hell. The city itself seemed alive, almost too perfect, too ordered. The Aztecs moved with purpose, their clothes bright with woven patterns that told stories older than memory. Even the air seemed enchanted, filled with music and ritual. The Spaniards were guests, but they felt like intruders. They looked upon the great temple of Huitzilopochtli and saw horror, not holiness. At its summit, priests in painted masks offered hearts to the rising sun, believing that each sacrifice kept the world turning. To the Aztecs, it was devotion. To the Europeans, it was madness. The Spaniards whispered prayers beneath their breath, clutching their rosaries as if to protect their souls from the sight. Yet, even as they called the Aztecs pagans, something deep within them trembled with respect. For the Aztecs were not savages. They were builders of worlds, dreamers of stars. Their calendar measured the cosmos with divine precision. Their temples aligned with the movements of the sun, the moon, and the sacred Venus star. It was as if they had decoded the language of creation itself, and that frightened the Europeans more than blood or sacrifice. They began to suspect that what they had entered was not a city at all, but a mirror. In its reflection, they saw their own faith, their own hunger for order, their own offerings of blood disguised in gold chalices and holy chants. Awe turned to fear, because what stood before them was proof that the divine had many faces, and some of them were not European. As the sun sank over Tenochtitlan, painting the water red and gold, the Spaniards stood silent, unable to decide if they were standing in paradise or in the heart of the inferno. To understand the Aztec world, one had to understand Teotl. It was not a god with a face, nor a being sitting on a throne above the clouds. Teotl was everything. It was the energy that flowed through stone and sky, the heartbeat of the sun, the whisper of wind, and the spark within every living soul. The Aztec priests said that Teotl moved through all things, weaving creation and destruction into one endless dance. To the Spaniards, this idea was terrifying. Their faith was built on division, light against darkness, heaven against hell, God against Satan. But here was a people who saw no war between such forces, only balance. To them, even death was not an ending, but a transformation of energy, a returning to Teotl. When the friars tried to translate the word, they failed. There was no Latin word that could hold it. They wrote that the Aztecs worshipped many gods, not realizing that those gods were only faces of one infinite presence. In the temples, priests painted in black soot and crimson sang hymns that vibrated through the air like waves. Each note was a prayer, not to ask for favors, but to maintain the flow of harmony between man and cosmos. Every ritual, every offering, every sacrifice was not cruelty, but communication. The blood of life was given back to life itself. When Spanish missionaries heard this, they called it heresy. To them, only their God could be divine, and any other truth was born of demons. But deep down, some of them were fascinated. The priests of Teotl spoke of energy and light, of cycles and stars, of a divine rhythm echoing in all matter. It sounded more like philosophy than superstition. Some friars even began to suspect that these people had glimpsed something that Europe had forgotten. One chronicler described an old Aztec priest who told him, "You see many gods where there is only one." The friar did not know how to answer. In that moment, two worlds faced each other. One worshipped a single creator outside of creation, while the other worshipped creation itself as the face of the divine. The Spaniards believed they were bringing knowledge, but perhaps they were silencing it. Because if Teotl was real, then God was not confined to cathedrals or written words. He was in the rain, in the stars, and even in the hearts of those who had never heard of Christ. The language of the gods was not written in Latin, but in wind and fire, in the movement of planets and the turning of seasons. And though the Spaniards burned the temples and erased the codices, Teotl could not be destroyed. It lived in the rhythm of the earth, waiting beneath the ruins, breathing through every stone. Even now, when one listens closely, it still whispers through time, reminding the world that the divine was never foreign, only forgotten. Long before Christian missionaries carried their wooden crosses into the New World, the Aztecs already had one. It was called the Nahui Olin, the symbol of the fourfold movement. It was a cross, not of suffering, but of balance. At its center was the fifth sun, the heart of existence, from which all energy radiated. Each arm of the cross represented one direction, one element, and one stage in the cycle of creation and destruction. To the Aztecs, it was not just a symbol, it was the pattern of the universe. When the Spaniards first saw it carved into temple walls and painted on sacred shields, they were stunned. How could these so-called pagans use the very sign of Christ? But when they asked what it meant, they were horrified by the answer. The Aztec priests told them it marked the movement of the sun, the rhythm of life and death, and the power that kept the heavens turning. To the Spaniards, this was blasphemy. The cross belonged to Christ alone. Anything else was a mockery made by demons, so they called it the devil's mark. Yet the Nahui Olin was older than any cathedral. It had guided generations through the cycles of the suns, teaching that all things must die to be reborn. Its 4 points aligned with the sacred directions, the same way church altars later aligned with the east. In its geometry was a science of time and motion that even European astronomers could not yet grasp. The priests of the New World spoke of balance, of the sun's struggle against darkness, of the cosmic dance that created harmony. But the missionaries could see only idolatry. To them, every native symbol was a counterfeit planted by Satan to deceive the innocent. And so, the Nahui Olin was erased. Its carvings were smashed, its meaning condemned. But secretly, some indigenous artists began to weave it into Christian art. Hidden behind the Virgin's robes, beneath the feet of saints, the fourfold cross survived, quietly merging with the new religion that tried to destroy it. In time, even some Spanish priests noticed that the people prayed with gestures older than Christianity. tracing the directions before kneeling. They did not know they were still honoring the Nahui Olin. The Aztecs saw the cross as a reminder that everything turns, that life itself moves through endless cycles of birth and death. The Spaniards saw it as a symbol of salvation through one man's suffering. Both believed it was sacred. Both saw in it the shape of eternity. But one saw the world as divine, and the other saw the divine above the world. In that difference, the meaning of the cross split forever. Even today, beneath the surface of Mexico's cathedrals, the ancient cross still lingers, etched into stone, whispering that before the cross of Christ, there was another, one that spoke not of sin, but of the eternal motion of the Sunday. Among all the gods of the Aztec world, none disturbed the missionaries more than Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. His image adorned temples, his name carried through the wind, and his legend spoke of light descending from the heavens to guide humankind. To the Aztecs, he was the teacher of wisdom, the inventor of the calendar, and the one who brought maize, the sacred food that sustained life. He taught that the true sacrifice was not blood spilled in war, but the offering of one's own heart through knowledge, truth, and balance. When the Spaniards heard this, their blood ran cold. They saw in Quetzalcoatl something dangerously familiar, a god of compassion, who once walked among men, who promised to return one day from the east. A god who rejected violence, who taught love over conquest. It was too close to the story of Christ, and for the Vatican, that was unacceptable. How could a pagan civilization on the far side of the world already hold a story so similar to the gospel? To the priests, this could not be coincidence. It had to be the work of the devil, a counterfeit Christ meant to deceive souls. They branded Quetzalcoatl as the serpent of Eden, the ancient liar reborn in feathers and gold. But to the Aztecs, the serpent was not evil, it was sacred. The serpent crawled upon the earth, yet its feathers reached the sky. It united heaven and soil, spirit and matter, divine and human. It was the bridge between worlds. This was the essence of Quetzalcoatl, the harmony of opposites. And that was what frightened the church most. His teachings mirrored the heart of Christianity, but without the chains of its doctrine. He was the god of rebirth and resurrection, the morning star who fell and rose again. Some chroniclers even wrote that Quetzalcoatl was described as having fair skin and a beard, arriving from across the sea, wearing white garments. These details fueled the Spanish belief that he was a prophecy of Christ, or worse, a demonic imitation of him. When Cortes arrived, some Aztecs believed he might be the returning Quetzalcoatl. This mistake would open the gates of their empire and seal its fall. But in the hidden temples, priests whispered that the true Quetzalcoatl would never come bearing swords. He would come as light itself, when the stars were aligned and humanity was ready once more. The missionaries did everything they could to erase his name. They destroyed his temples, burned his idols, and called his followers heretics. Yet the symbol of the feathered serpent could not be buried. It reappeared in secret carvings, in woven cloth, in the art of saints whose robes curled like scales. Quetzalcoatl became a shadow of Christ, and Christ became a shadow of him. Both carried the promise of divine renewal. Both offered the path to wisdom through self-sacrifice. The only difference was this: one was remembered by a church, the other by the earth. In the heart of the Aztec pantheon stood Tezcatlipoca, the god of night, reflection, and destiny. His name meant the smoking mirror, for he was said to see all things through obsidian glass, the dark stone that revealed truth and illusion alike. To the Aztecs, he was not a demon, but the face of the unseen, the whisper of fate, the shadow that followed every man. Yet, to the Spanish priests who first heard his name, he was nothing less than the devil himself. They saw in him the reflection of Lucifer, the fallen star cast into darkness. He ruled the night, they said, and so he must be evil. But they could not understand that Tezcatlipoca was not the enemy of light. He was its mirror. In Aztec belief, He and Quetzalcoatl were twin forces, one of shadow, one of dawn, each shaping the other. Without darkness, the sun would have no meaning. Without temptation, there could be no virtue. The world survived on balance, not purity. Tezcatlipoca's mirror was more than a symbol. It was a tool of revelation. Priests gazed into polished obsidian to confront their own hearts, to see the truth beneath the mask. What they saw there was often terrifying, for the mirror did not lie. It showed their flaws, their fears, their hidden desires. To face Tezcatlipoca was to face oneself. In that reflection, the missionaries saw blasphemy. They declared his mirror a gateway to hell, a trick of demons. But for the Aztecs, it was a path to wisdom. It taught that the greatest battle was not with others, but within. The smoking mirror showed that even gods must fall, that even heroes stumble, that perfection is an illusion. The Aztec stories tell of Tezcatlipoca's battles with Quetzalcoatl, how he tricked the feathered serpent into breaking his vow of purity, driving him into exile. But this was not evil for evil's sake. It was a lesson. Every soul, no matter how divine, must confront its shadow. Even the bringer of light must walk through darkness. When Spanish monks recorded these myths, they twisted them, calling Tezcatlipoca the Prince of Lies, the Aztec Satan. Yet the deeper truth was that he represented the mirror of the human spirit. He was the dark half of creation, necessary for wholeness. His smoke was not evil but mystery, hiding the secrets that only courage could reveal. The Aztecs offered him obsidian, jaguar skins, and the breath of incense, honoring the night as sacred, not cursed. To them, facing the darkness was an act of strength, not sin. The missionaries tried to erase his name, but his mirror never disappeared. It lived on in legends, in symbols carved beneath Christian altars, and in the quiet understanding that to truly know oneself, one must look into the dark. Tezcatlipoca still waits there, in the reflection of every human soul, reminding us that the shadow is not our enemy, it is our teacher. In the burning heart of the Aztec world rose Huitzilopochtli, the solar warrior, the god who carried the sun across the sky. His name meant hummingbird of the south, but his nature was fire. Every morning he was reborn, rising from the darkness to fight the endless battle against the night. Without him, the world would fall into shadow, and all life would perish. To the Aztecs, his war was sacred. To the Spaniards, it was savagery. They looked upon his temples, saw the blood running down the steps, and called him the devil. But what they never understood was that this blood was not worship of death, it was the price of life. Huitzilopochtli represented the struggle that kept the universe alive. The Aztecs believed that the sun needed nourishment to continue its journey, and that nourishment was energy, given through the life force of humans and gods alike. It was not cruelty but balance, the same balance that made crops grow, rivers flow, and stars burn. The Aztecs did not kill for pleasure, they sacrificed so that the world itself could keep breathing. When they raised their knives to the sky, they were offering back the energy that had been given to them. It was a cosmic exchange, not a sin. But to the missionaries who arrived in the 16th century, it was proof of barbarism. They could not see the sacred order beneath the ritual. They saw only darkness. They called Huitzilopochtli a demon of war, the enemy of peace. Yet he was not chaos. He was discipline, duty, and cosmic order. Every colour on his painted image told a story. The blue of his face symbolised the heavens. The gold of his feathers was the light of the Sunday. His serpent-shaped weapon represented lightning, the power that split sky from earth. He was the guardian of the fifth sun, the current age of humanity, the one who kept creation from collapsing back into the void. Without him, even the gods would die. The Spanish chroniclers tried to erase his name, yet they could not erase his meaning, because every sunrise was still his victory. The Aztecs understood something the invaders had forgotten, that creation is not peaceful, it is an endless battle between light and decay. Even the Christian story of Christ carries the same pattern, a sacrifice to preserve the world. The difference was only in form. One was clothed in blood and smoke, the other in bread and wine. Both spoke of renewal through offering. When the Spaniards tore down his temples, they built churches on their ruins, thinking they had silenced the god of war. But beneath the altars, Huitzilopochtli's symbols remained carved in stone, hidden beneath the cross. Even now, as the sun rises over Mexico each morning, it carries his name in silence. The solar warrior still fights, not for conquest, but for life itself, forever reminding the world that light must always be earned through the courage to face the dark. When the Spaniards stepped onto Aztec soil, one of the first things they noticed carved into temple walls and painted on sacred robes was the serpent. To the Mesoamerican mind, the serpent was not a creature of evil, but a symbol of divine wisdom. It slithered between earth and sky, shedding its skin as it renewed itself, the perfect image of transformation and eternal life. To the Aztecs and the Maya before them, the serpent was sacred because it connected heaven and earth. It was the body of the world itself, coiling through the rivers, winds, and roots of creation. But to the Christian missionaries who came from across the ocean, the serpent was the face of the devil. In their holy book, the serpent had whispered in Eden and brought about the fall of man. It was cursed to crawl forever, a reminder of sin and temptation. So when the priests saw the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl, or the twin serpents carved into temple stairs, they saw not wisdom but blasphemy. They could not understand that here, the serpent was not the deceiver. It was the teacher. In Aztec stories, the serpent gave form to life. It was the motion of energy, the power that united opposites, the line between death and rebirth. It carried the light of the sun and the breath of the gods. Every coil was a lesson in balance. To hold the serpent sacred was to understand that the divine lived within every changing thing. But the friars feared what they saw. They raised the cross against the serpent, believing they were cleansing the land of Satan's mark. They destroyed temples, where serpents adorned the walls, burned idols, and built churches on top of them. Yet beneath those very churches, the old carvings remained, the stone serpents sleeping beneath the Christian altars. The conflict between serpent and cross was more than religious. It was a clash between two ways of seeing the world. One saw knowledge as a gift, the other as a danger. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent offered knowledge and was punished. In Mesoamerica, the serpent offered knowledge and was worshipped. To the Aztecs, enlightenment was not rebellion, it was divine duty. The feathered serpent was the path to understanding the universe. To the Church, it was the oldest lie ever told. And so, when the Spaniards saw the people bow to the serpent, they called them servants of Satan. But what if both symbols were never meant to be enemies? The cross and the serpent both spoke of transformation, one through suffering and salvation, the other through death and renewal. Both were symbols of the same eternal cycle. Yet fear blinded the conquerors to the truth they might have shared. In the centuries that followed, the serpent vanished from open worship, but it never truly died. Its wisdom went underground, hidden in stories, art, and memory. Even today, in the patterns of Mexican temples and the spirals of ancient glyphs, the serpent still waits, reminding the world that what one faith called sin, another called enlightenment. To the Spanish missionaries, the Aztec rituals of sacrifice were the proof they needed that this land was ruled by demons. They saw the temples, the chants, the hearts lifted to the sky, and called it barbaric. But what they did not realize was that they themselves practiced a ritual that mirrored it. Every Sunday, in cathedrals across Europe, priests lifted bread and wine and declared it the body and blood of their god. The difference was only in form, not in meaning. Both faiths believed that divine life was sustained through offering. Both believed that blood held the power to connect humans with the sacred. The Aztecs called it Nextlahualli, the payment of a debt owed to the gods. To them, existence itself was a gift from the divine, and life could only continue if that gift was returned. The blood of sacrifice was not cruelty, it was reciprocity. It was their way of feeding the sun, ensuring that dawn would come again. Without it, the world would fall into darkness. When the Spaniards watched the ceremonies from the temple steps, they recoiled in horror. Yet when they returned to their own altars, they too consumed what they called the body of Christ, a sacred act of remembering his sacrifice. The priests never saw the mirror they held up to each other. The Aztec rite was literal, the Christian rite symbolic, but both carried the same truth. Life must give itself to sustain life. Fire and blood were not symbols of evil, but of transformation. In both religions, the divine was not distant. It was consumed, taken into the body, made one with the believer. The Aztecs believed that by sharing in the energy of the gods, they maintained the balance of the cosmos. Christians believed that by sharing in the flesh of Christ, they gained salvation and eternal life. The friars could not accept that a pagan ritual could resemble their own. To them, such resemblance was not coincidence but corruption. They said the devil had imitated the Holy Sacrament to deceive the people. But in truth, these rituals spoke to something older than any church. The idea that the divine and human are joined through offering runs through every ancient culture. The Aztecs simply saw it through the lens of nature. The sun gave its light and died each day so the world could live. Humans, as children of the sun, must give something in return. When the missionaries replaced the Aztec temples with cathedrals, the altars changed, but the rhythm remained. Candles still burned, incense still rose, and believers still knelt before an image of sacrifice. The fire and blood never truly vanished. They were only reinterpreted, given new names, new prayers. The Spaniards believed they had ended the pagan sacrifices, but perhaps they had only continued them in a different form. Beneath the gilded crosses and silver chalices, the same ancient truth lingered, that creation and offering are one and the same. The night the codices burned, the sky itself seemed to mourn. Piles of folded books made from bark and deer hide were thrown into the flames by trembling hands that believed they were saving souls. The fire roared in the plazas of Mexico, fed by words written in colours of red, black, and gold. They were not ordinary books. They were the memory of an entire world. Each page was alive with gods, stars, and the rhythm of the universe. Priests had spent lifetimes painting them by hand, recording everything from astronomy to medicine, from prophecies to poems. But to the missionaries, they were the devil's words. They said these books contained spells, false gods, and dangerous truths that must be destroyed. So they called the people to watch, claiming it was holy work. The codices hissed as they turned to ash, their pigments melting into smoke that rose toward the heavens like lost prayers. To the Aztec scribes who stood in silence, it was like watching their ancestors die again. Each symbol that vanished in the fire was a doorway closed, a bridge burned between humanity and the divine. The friars did not understand what they were erasing. They saw only drawings of serpents and suns, thinking them demonic. They never knew they were looking at maps of time, diagrams of planetary cycles, and stories that explained the soul's journey through creation. In those pages were calculations so advanced they could predict eclipses centuries ahead. There were songs written to teach the harmony between man and earth. There were poems about the heart as a flower that blooms and dies under the gaze of the Sunday, and there were secrets that spoke of Teotl, the sacred energy in all things. All of it gone in one night of smoke and scripture. Only a handful of codices survived, hidden away by those brave enough to risk death. The rest became nothing but memory. When the missionaries reported back to Spain, they celebrated. They wrote that the fires had cleansed the land of Satan's poison, but what they had truly burned was knowledge. They believed they were destroying superstition, but they were destroying science, philosophy, and art. The codices were more than religion. They were the Aztec way of understanding existence. The destruction of those books was the destruction of a voice. The priests who carried the fire believed they were bringing light, yet the flames only deepened the darkness. Centuries later, scholars would search for the lost codices, finding fragments buried in the earth or hidden in convent walls. But most of it will never be recovered. The wisdom of 1,000 years turned to dust in a single night. The Vatican kept records of the burnings, calling them victories of faith. Yet, the truth is that the codices were not evil. They were mirrors of the cosmos. And when they burned, a piece of the universe went dark. When the Spanish crown extended its reach across the ocean, it did not come alone. It brought with it the Inquisition, a machine of fear and faith forged in Europe. The same system that once hunted heretics in Spain now set its sights on the New World. But here, its targets were not secret Christians or rebellious scholars. They were the healers, the dreamers, and the shamans of the Americas. These were people who spoke to the spirits of rain and earth, who healed with herbs and prayers older than any church. To the missionaries, they were servants of Satan. To the inquisitors, they were proof that the devil had claimed the New World long before Christ arrived. The trials began quietly, in small villages, where the priests whispered questions through confession. Who still prayed to the old gods? Who still danced beneath the moon? Who carried amulets of stone and feather? Names were written down, and soon the accused were dragged before wooden crosses and burning candles. The inquisitors asked the same questions they once asked in Europe. Do you renounce the devil? Do you swear loyalty to the true faith? But here, the accused did not even understand the language of their judges. Many confessed out of fear or confusion. Some were tortured until they said what the priests wanted to hear. The shamans who once guided their people through sickness and sorrow were now branded witches and deceivers. Their rituals, once done to honor the spirits of nature, were rewritten as black masses. Their sacred herbs became potions of sorcery. Even the simple act of offering incense to the sun could lead to death. The Inquisition saw devils in every drumbeat, every chant, every carved idol. The Church claimed it was saving souls, but in truth, it was silencing an entire way of life. The Spanish believed that by destroying the old beliefs, they could replace them with their own. But faith cannot be erased so easily. Beneath the surface, the old gods survived. People prayed to saints, whose faces resembled their ancient deities. Festivals to honor the Virgin were held on the same days, once dedicated to Tonantzin, the Earth Mother. The Inquisition could punish bodies, but it could not conquer memory. Still, its shadow spread deep. For nearly 300 years, the Holy Office in Mexico and Peru hunted thousands of people. Some were burned alive. Others were paraded through town in shame, wearing cone-shaped hats marked with symbols of their supposed sins. The smoke of their punishment rose over cathedrals, built upon the ruins of temples. It was a message written in fire. The priests believed they were protecting the world from darkness. But in their search for evil, they became the very thing they feared. The Inquisition in the New World was not just a war against witches. It was a war against knowledge, against nature, and against the spirit of the land itself. When the Spanish missionaries looked upon the pantheon of the Aztec gods, they did not see divinity, they saw demons. To them, every painted idol, every carved stone, every feathered image of a god was the mask of the devil. And so began one of the most systematic acts of spiritual rewriting in history. The gods of rain, sun, wind, and earth were stripped of their holiness and remade into monsters. What had once been worshipped as the sacred forces of nature were now condemned as agents of hell. The priests called it cleansing, but it was really conquest by language. They understood that to control a people, one must first control their words, their symbols, their heavens, and so, with each sermon, they renamed the gods. Tlaloc, the bringer of rain and fertility, became a demon of storms and floods. Tezcatlipoca, the god of fate and reflection, was recast as Lucifer, the tempter. Coatlicue, the mother of the gods, was turned into a monstrous serpent woman. Every divinity became a shadow of evil. The Aztecs were told that their gods had deceived them, that they were never divine, only devils in disguise. The missionaries painted stories of angels and saints to replace the old ones, building a new spiritual map over the ruins of the old. But beneath the surface, the old cosmology still breathed. It survived in secret prayers, in patterns woven into clothing, in songs whispered beneath the sound of church bells. The people learned to mask their gods behind Christian faces. When they prayed to the Virgin Mary, they were also praying to Tonantzin, the mother of all creation. When they celebrated St. John, they honoured Tlaloc, calling for rain. The priests believed they had purified the land, but the faith they built was not purely European. It was a fusion born of fire and memory. The demonization of the old gods was more than spiritual warfare. It was psychological conquest. By turning the sacred into evil, the Church broke the heart of the people's belief system. It made them fear what they once loved, shame what they once honoured. Yet, even as fear spread, so did defiance. Artists began carving hidden symbols into cathedrals. The serpent of Quetzalcoatl coiled behind the altars. The sun disk of Huitzilopochtli appeared in stained glass. The saints' robes shimmered with patterns that told stories of gods long forbidden. In secret, the people understood the truth. The gods had not been destroyed, they had only changed their names. The Vatican's theology could erase their temples, but not their essence. The rain still fell, the sun still rose. The wind still spoke the names of gods the priests had tried to bury. And so, even as the Church declared victory, the old pantheon watched from behind the mask of saints, patient as stone, waiting for the day their true names would be spoken again. When the Spaniards conquered the Aztec Empire, they believed they had replaced one religion with another. Cathedrals rose where temples once stood, and crosses gleamed where the sunstones had been buried. But inside those cathedrals, the old gods were not gone, they were hiding. The hands that built the new churches were the same hands that once carved idols of Quetzalcoatl and painted the faces of Tlaloc. Indigenous artisans, forced to serve the church, began to weave their faith into the very walls of the empire that tried to erase it. They carved serpents beneath the feet of angels, slipped sun discs behind the halos of saints, and painted maize and feathers into holy murals. To the Spanish priests, these were harmless decorations. To the artisans, they were prayers in disguise. A new kind of faith was being born, one that existed in secret, hidden in stone and colour. In Oaxaca and Puebla, the facades of churches shimmered with floral patterns that looked purely ornamental. But to those who knew the old ways, each flower carried meaning. The 4 petals of the Nahui Olin could be seen behind images of the Virgin Mary, the ancient symbol of the sun disguised beneath Christian art. The people still came to these churches, kneeling as they had been taught, crossing themselves before the altars. Yet in their hearts they whispered other names. When they said Mary, they meant Tonantzin, the mother of the earth. When they lit candles for Christ, they were calling to the light of Huitzilopochtli. The friars preached conversion, but the people practiced transformation. They did not abandon their gods, they concealed them beneath new faces. This quiet rebellion spread across New Spain, not through swords or words, but through art. Sculptors hid serpents within the folds of saints' robes. Painters gave angels the skin and faces of the native people. Even in the grand cathedrals of Mexico City, beneath the Virgin of Guadalupe, one can still see the patterns of ancient suns and feathers carved into the marble. To the Church, this blending of faiths was accidental. To the people, it was survival. The gods of their ancestors had found sanctuary inside the very halls meant to destroy them. In time, even some priests began to notice. They saw the strange designs, the familiar symbols returning, But by then, it was too late. The two worlds had already merged. A new spiritual language had been created, one where Christ and Quetzalcoatl could share the same altar. The Vatican called it syncretism. The people called it remembrance. Through art, the Aztecs had done the impossible. They had hidden their gods in plain sight. And though centuries would pass and empires would fall, those carvings and paintings would remain, quiet witnesses to a secret faith that refused to die, whispering through every chapel that the old gods were never gone. They had only learned to wear new faces. In the oldest cathedrals of Mexico, if you look closely, you can still see the serpent. It coils beneath columns, curls around arches, and hides in the carvings of doorways where sunlight falls in perfect lines. The priests who walk these halls believe they stand in monuments built to honor Christ, but beneath their feet slumbers the memory of Quetzalcoatl. The serpent survived the conquest not as an idol, but as architecture. When the Spanish tore down the temples of the Aztecs, they used the same stones to build their churches. The serpent was buried in the foundation, and perhaps, in a quiet act of defiance, the artisans carved it there on purpose. At first glance, the patterns seem harmless, decorative curls of stone and vine. But when light passes through the cathedral windows, those lines reveal shapes too deliberate to be accident. Scales shimmer across archways. Tongues of fire coil toward the altar. The walls themselves seem alive. In some churches, the rising sun shines directly onto the crucifix each solstice, just as it once illuminated the image of the sun god on temple walls. The alignment is too precise to be coincidence. The masons who designed these places understood both the old and new heavens. They made sure the sacred geometry of their ancestors would never be forgotten. The serpent and the cross were not enemies here. They shared the same space, the same light. The cathedrals became living hybrids, half Christian and half cosmic, built by people who prayed to both worlds. The friars believed they had purified the land, but the very buildings they blessed were temples of resistance. The serpent had found a way to survive beneath the Vatican's eyes. In Puebla, a church dedicated to Saint Michael features serpent heads carved along its entrance, their mouths open in eternal hiss. In Oaxaca, sunlight floods the main altar at the same angle that once lit the temples of Huitzilopochtli. Even the great cathedral in Mexico City was built upon the ruins of the Templo Mayor, where twin pyramids once rose to honor the sun and the rain. The cross was raised over the same earth that had once drunk the blood of sacrifice. It was as if the new faith had been grafted onto the bones of the old. The serpent waited there, patient and silent, its body hidden in the mortar. Generations of believers have knelt upon its back without knowing. But perhaps that was always the plan. For the serpent was never a symbol of destruction in the Aztec mind. It was renewal, transformation, rebirth. Its presence beneath the cathedrals was not a curse, but a promise that truth cannot be erased, only buried. And one day, when the light returns at the right angle, the carvings will reveal themselves again, and the serpent will rise once more, not as an enemy of God, but as the wisdom that had been sleeping beneath his house all along. Across Mexico, the old temples still breathe. Their stones are cracked, their altars scarred, yet they whisper stories to those who listen. Beneath the roots of modern cities, fragments of carved walls still bear the shapes of gods who once ruled the skies. In the ruins of Cholula, in Teotihuacan, in the remains of Tenochtitlan itself, angels and jaguars now share the same walls. The Spanish built their churches on top of these sacred places, but they could not silence the stones. When the wind passes through the broken corridors, it carries voices from both worlds, the hymns of priests and the chants of the old ones, woven together in a single echo. Archaeologists call them ruins, but the people who live near them call them teachers. Each carving tells a story of how the world once worked in balance. Serpents coil beside crosses. Feathers and halos twist together in impossible harmony. The jaguar, symbol of the night sun, crouches beneath the carved feet of saints. It is as if the stones themselves refused to choose between the two heavens. The Spanish thought they had conquered the Aztec gods by destroying their temples. But destruction only turned the gods into silence, and silence, over time, became song. When sunlight hits these ruins at dawn, the shadows move like living beings. They reveal patterns the eye misses at first, faces hidden in the cracks, wings where there should be claws. The stones are not dead. They are memory made solid. They remember the footsteps of dancers, the smoke of offerings, the prayers of men who believed the sun would die without them. They remember the moment the soldiers arrived, swinging swords and shouting prayers, tearing down idols and raising crosses. And they remember how, beneath the sound of conquest, the heartbeat of the earth kept going. In some temples, fragments of plaster still cling to the walls, painted with colours that have outlasted empires. The reds still glow like blood, the blues still shine like sky. These pigments were made from plants, minerals, and tears, mixed with reverence and patience. They were never meant to fade. And even now, 500 years later, they refuse to. To walk among these ruins is to feel both mourning and defiance. The angels carved by Spanish hands stand beside the jaguars carved by Aztec ones, both guardians of something older than religion. Together, they form a story that the conquerors never meant to tell, a story of fusion, resistance, and endurance. The stones whisper it to anyone willing to stop and listen. They say that no belief can truly die. They say that truth changes shape, but never disappears. The old temples may have fallen, but their spirits remain, hiding in walls, in shadows, in every grain of dust that remembers. And if you listen long enough, you can still hear them whisper the same ancient prayer, that light and darkness, heaven and earth, are not enemies, but reflections of the same eternal song. Long before the first Bible arrived in the New World, the Aztecs already lived by a gospel of their own. It was not written on parchment, nor spoken in Latin. It was written in stone, sung in ritual, and painted in colours that told the story of the Sunday. To them, the universe was not ruled by sin or salvation, but by movement. Everything was alive and interconnected, and life itself depended on sacrifice and renewal. This was the lost gospel of the Sunday. The Aztecs believed the world had been created and destroyed 4 times before, each age ending in chaos. The current world, the 5th sun, was born through divine sacrifice. The gods had given their own blood to bring light to the sky, and so humanity was bound by gratitude to keep the sun alive through offerings, to give back a part of themselves so that creation could continue. The act of sacrifice was not about cruelty, it was about balance. To the Aztecs, even the gods were not beyond death. They too bled, struggled, and renewed themselves in the cycle of time. This was a universe built not on guilt, but on participation. Every sunrise was proof that the divine still lived among men, and every sunset was a reminder that light must always be earned. When the missionaries arrived, they told the Aztecs that humanity was born from sin, and that only through Christ could they be saved. The Aztecs listened and nodded, but their hearts held a different truth. They did not see themselves as fallen. They saw themselves as part of a living cosmos that demanded harmony. Where the Christian story spoke of one sacrifice for all, the Aztec story spoke of countless sacrifices shared by gods and humans alike. Both were about redemption, but the meaning was different. In one, man was saved from darkness. In the other, man helped save the light. The missionaries called it heresy, but to the Aztecs, it was the rhythm of existence. Every breath, every crop harvested, every star that rose was part of the eternal exchange between life and death. Even the simplest acts were sacred. Lighting a fire, offering food, or shedding a single drop of blood meant participating in the same divine cycle that began at creation. In their temples, priests would stand beneath the rising sun, their faces painted gold, chanting to remind the heavens that humans had not forgotten their duty. It was not fear that drove them, but devotion. They knew that life was fragile, and that the gods relied on their remembrance. When the Spaniards burned the temples and declared the old beliefs destroyed, the gospel of the sun went underground. Yet, it still survives, in the way the people honour the dawn, in the festivals that welcome spring, and in the firelight that burns during every ceremony. The message remains unchanged. The universe does not demand guilt. It asks for gratitude, for the understanding that creation endures only when we give back what we have been given. In the quiet libraries of Europe, far from the burning temples of the New World, a different kind of discovery was taking place. Among the dusty manuscripts and secret chambers of the Vatican, a handful of scholars began to whisper of strange similarities between the pagan gods of Mexico and the sacred truths of Christianity. These were the shadow scholars of the Renaissance, Jesuit priests, and theologians who read the forbidden reports sent by missionaries and conquistadors. They saw in the Aztec beliefs something that both fascinated and disturbed them. They read of Teotl, the sacred energy that lived in all things, and they compared it to the Logos, the divine word that Christian theology said brought creation into being. The resemblance was unsettling. How could a people who had never seen a Bible describe a concept so close to the foundation of Christian thought? Some claimed it was proof that God had planted truth among all nations. Others feared it meant something more dangerous, that humanity had once shared a single ancient wisdom that the Church no longer fully understood. These secret thinkers filled their notebooks with observations that could never be spoken aloud. They noted that Quetzalcoatl's teachings of humility and knowledge mirrored the message of Christ. They compared the Aztec idea of cosmic sacrifice to the crucifixion itself, and they questioned whether the burning of the codices had destroyed not heresy, but knowledge that might have deepened the faith. For every Jesuit who condemned the Aztec gods as demons, there was another who suspected they were misunderstood reflections of the same divine light. But such ideas could never reach the public. The Inquisition would have silenced them before the ink dried, so the scholars wrote in code, hiding their findings in private journals and marginal notes. Some of these notes still rest in the Vatican archives, written in Latin and locked away for centuries. There are records of missionaries who reported conversations with Aztec elders that left them shaken. One wrote that the natives spoke of the Creator as a spirit without form or face, the heart of heaven and the breath of earth. The friar confessed that their words reminded him of St. John's Gospel, where it is written that the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But he dared not say it publicly. The Church demanded certainty, not questions. Yet curiosity has a way of surviving. Over the decades, these forbidden comparisons spread quietly through the Jesuit network, passed between scholars who believed that truth could not be confined to one faith. Some of them even began to suspect that the Aztec concept of Teotl was not pagan at all, but a fragment of the same divine mystery that Europe called God. They were never recognized, never praised, but their silence was not ignorance. It was protection. In their secret hearts, they knew that the light of knowledge burns brighter when it is shared, and perhaps, in the stories of the Aztecs, they had glimpsed a mirror held up to heaven. For centuries after the conquest, a silent war continued across the lands of the New World. It was not fought with swords or soldiers, but with symbols, words, and faith. The Church had destroyed the temples, burned the codices, and outlawed the names of the old gods. But the people remembered. They remembered in songs sung during harvest, in dances performed at midnight, in the quiet offerings left beneath crosses. The Vatican had declared victory, but beneath the surface, Catholicism in the Americas became something else entirely. It became a mask. Behind the face of the saints, the old gods watched and waited. The Virgin Mary was worshipped as Tonantzin, the mother of all creation. St. John carried the echo of Tlaloc, the bringer of rain. Even Christ on the cross bore the hidden light of Huitzilopochtli, the sun dying each day to be reborn. The priests believed they had converted the people, yet the people had converted the faith itself. The war on memory had failed. Still, the church continued to tighten its grip. It sent inquisitors to root out idolatry, to find those who whispered the old prayers in secret. Villagers were forced to confess, to burn their own altars, to swear they no longer believed in the ancient gods. Yet, even under the threat of death, the memory endured. It was passed down through mothers, teaching their children the rhythm of old songs disguised as hymns. It lived in the patterns woven into clothing, in the architecture of the cathedrals, where the serpent still coiled beneath the stone. The priests never realized that every sermon they preached stood atop the ruins of a temple that still hummed with sacred power. The Aztecs and other native peoples learned to survive by hiding their gods inside the church's walls. Their devotion became a double language. The surface spoke of saints and sacraments, but underneath flowed the ancient current of Teotl, the divine energy that connected all things. In this secret faith, the people found strength. Their gods had not died, they had adapted. Centuries turned and empires fell, but the mask remained. Even as new generations grew up calling themselves Christian, they carried within them the memory of the fifth son, the eternal balance between life and death. The war on memory could erase statues and scriptures, but it could not erase the human heart. It beat to the same rhythm as the drums that once echoed through Tenochtitlan. In the eyes of the church, this blend of old and new was impurity, but to the people, it was harmony. Their world was not divided between heaven and earth, good and evil. It was one sacred whole, hidden beneath layers of silence and survival. The priests built their cathedrals to honor God, but unknowingly, they also built sanctuaries for the very deities they sought to destroy. The war on memory was never won. It only changed shape, and the old gods, dressed now in robes of saints and angels, continued to whisper through the centuries, waiting for their names to be spoken once more. In the year 1531, a man named Juan Diego claimed that the Virgin Mary appeared to him on a hill near Mexico City. The church declared it a miracle, a sign that God had blessed the new world. But for the people who lived there, that hill had another name. It was Tepeyac, the ancient place where the goddess Tonantzin, the mother of creation, had once been worshipped. Long before the Spaniards arrived, pilgrims had climbed that same hill to offer flowers and prayers to her. When the Virgin of Guadalupe appeared there, wrapped in stars and light, many knew that Tonantzin had returned. She had simply changed her name. To the Spanish friars, it was proof that the natives were finally accepting the true faith. To the people, it was something deeper. They saw in the Virgin's image the face of their mother goddess reborn. Her skin was not pale like the statues from Europe. It was brown, the colour of earth. Her robe was covered in the symbols of the sun and moon. Beneath her feet lay the serpent, but she did not crush it. She stood upon it as if she understood its power. The missionaries preached that she was the mother of Christ, yet her presence felt older than Christianity itself. She spoke not only to the church, but to the soul of the land. Tonantzin had survived, hidden behind the gentle smile of Guadalupe. The people began to visit her shrine in numbers the church had never seen. They knelt before her image, lighting candles and whispering prayers in Nahuatl, their native tongue. Some friars grew uneasy, realizing that what was happening at Tepeyac was not pure conversion but transformation. The faith of the old world and the new had merged into one. The Virgin of Guadalupe became both Mother of God and Mother of the Earth. For centuries, she would stand as a bridge between the two religions, the symbol of a nation born from conquest but still guided by its ancient roots. Artists painted her surrounded by rays of gold that looked like the sun discs of the Aztec gods. Her blue-green mantle, the colour once reserved for divinity, reminded all who saw her that she was not merely a saint but something cosmic. Even the church could not fully explain her power. She united people who had been divided by war, language, and faith. She became the mother of the oppressed, the voice of the forgotten, and the memory of a goddess the priests had tried to erase. Over time, she would become the soul of Mexico itself, worshipped in cathedrals and humble homes alike. Yet those who look closely still see the ancient signs woven into her image, the symbols of Tonantzin shining through. The Virgin of Guadalupe was not just a miracle. She was a resurrection, the divine feminine reborn beneath the shadow of the cross, whispering softly to her children that she had never left them, only changed her face to survive. For centuries, people have whispered of the prophecy of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who would one day return from the east. The Aztecs believed that he had once walked among humans, a teacher who brought light, knowledge, and order to the world before vanishing across the ocean. He promised to return when the world had fallen into darkness. When the Spanish ships first appeared on the horizon in 1519, many thought the prophecy had come true. They believed Hernán Cortés was Quetzalcoatl returned, the shining god in human form. But soon the truth revealed itself in blood and fire, and the people understood that their god had not returned. He had been replaced by conquerors who carried crosses instead of feathers. Yet the legend of the feathered serpent never died. It slept beneath centuries of silence, waiting for a new age. To the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl was not just a god. He was the spirit of enlightenment, the union of heaven and earth. The serpent represented the body, the earthbound, and the feathers symbolized spirit and ascension. Together they formed the perfect being, balanced between the physical and the divine. His return was never meant to be the arrival of a man, but the awakening of this wisdom within humanity. In modern times, mystics and scholars have begun to see the prophecy in a new light. They say the return of Quetzalcoatl is not about a god descending from the sky, but about humanity remembering what it has forgotten. It is the reawakening of knowledge that was buried beneath conquest, religion, and fear. It is the rediscovery of balance, the understanding that spirit and matter are one. Some see signs of this awakening all around us. The study of ancient texts, the revival of indigenous wisdom, the global desire to reconnect with the earth, all are seen as echoes of the serpent stirring once more. In this interpretation, Quetzalcoatl's return is the return of consciousness itself, a reminder that true divinity does not live above us, but within us. The Vatican once called him a demon, fearing the power of his message, but perhaps what they truly feared was that his teaching could free humanity from control. Quetzalcoatl taught that every soul carried the spark of creation, that wisdom was not owned by any church or empire. His name meant the precious twin, for he embodied the dual nature of existence, light and shadow, body and soul. His return is not an event to fear but to embrace. It is the moment when humanity learns again to live in harmony with the cosmos. The feathered serpent rises not from the ocean, but from within the human heart, coiling upward toward the sky. Even now, his symbols appear in dreams, in art, in the quiet longing for something ancient and pure. The prophecy of Quetzalcoatl endures because it was never about the past. It is about the eternal cycle of forgetting and remembering, and perhaps, in this age of awakening, the serpent has already begun to return. Deep beneath the marble floors of the Vatican, in vaults sealed from public view, lies a collection few have ever seen. Among the faded scrolls and illuminated manuscripts, there are said to be strange pages written in colours and symbols no European hand ever made. They are fragments of Aztec codices, smuggled from the New World during the 16th century. Officially, these manuscripts were meant to be destroyed, declared works of the devil. Yet somehow, a few survived. And their survival raises a haunting question. Did the Vatican truly seek to erase Aztec knowledge, or did it secretly study it? Scholars who have gained rare access to these archives describe drawings of serpents, suns, and stars, accompanied by Latin notes written in the margins. The handwriting is European, the commentary filled with wonder rather than condemnation. Some of these notes compare the Aztec god Teotl to the Christian concept of divine unity. Others question whether the Aztec priests, in their devotion to the cycles of the sun, might have discovered a natural theology hidden within their rituals. The deeper researchers look, the clearer it becomes that the Church did more than burn the old world's wisdom. It also kept it. The codices that remain are unlike anything else from the Americas. They are darker, their pigments muted, as though time itself had tried to erase them. But under ultraviolet light, the colours return, revealing the hidden patterns of constellations and calendars, maps of the heavens aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. These are not random works of art. They are precise scientific records. It is said that Jesuit scholars in the 17th century made secret copies of them, hoping to understand how the Aztecs measured time so perfectly without telescopes. Some even believed the symbols contained clues about the origins of divine wisdom itself. To them, the Aztecs were not pagans but philosophers who had glimpsed fragments of the same truth Christianity claimed to hold. Yet such thoughts were too dangerous to be spoken. The Church's power depended on being the sole keeper of divine knowledge. So the codices were hidden, locked away in the shadowed corners of history. Only a few pages were allowed to surface, presented as examples of pagan superstition. The rest remained in silence. In recent years, whispers of new discoveries have emerged. Scholars claim to have found references to a Codex of Shadows, a lost volume describing the meeting of European priests and Aztec sages who shared forbidden discussions about the soul and the cosmos. No one has seen it in full, but rumours say it lies somewhere within the Vatican's sealed collections. If true, it would mean that the Church not only feared the gods of the Aztecs, but also learned from them. The same institution that once called their knowledge demonic may have preserved it in secret, waiting for a time when the world was ready to see that what it tried to destroy was never darkness at all, but another kind of light. For centuries, the Aztec gods were called demons. Their temples were burned, their names erased, and their worshippers punished for daring to honour them. The Spanish chroniclers wrote that these deities were agents of evil, the servants of Satan, and the people who followed them were doomed to eternal damnation. But when we look closer, a different story emerges. The gods of nature, the feathered serpent, the sun warrior, the jaguar of the night, were not evil. They were teachers. They embodied the forces that shaped the world, the rhythms of life and death, creation and destruction. Every sacrifice, every ritual, every chant was a lesson in balance, in understanding the cosmos and humanity's place within it. The empire that conquered them, however, wore the mask of righteousness while committing acts of destruction. Cities were razed, knowledge burned, and sacred spaces turned into stone prisons of a foreign faith. The conquistadors believed they carried light, but in truth they brought shadow. They condemned the gods for demanding offerings, while they themselves imposed death and suffering in the name of salvation. What they called sin, the Aztecs called responsibility. What they called heresy, the people called devotion. Even the cross, which they raised over temples, became a tool of domination rather than a symbol of love. Yet the more we examine the legacy of this clash, the clearer it becomes that evil was not a matter of divine beings, but of human ambition and fear. The gods of nature taught lessons about cycles and transformation, about the delicate balance that keeps the world alive. The empire that crushed them taught obedience, but at the cost of wisdom and freedom. In hidden murals, in carvings beneath cathedrals, the lessons of the old gods survived. They were encoded in art, in architecture, in the stories that families whispered to their children. Even the rituals of Catholicism absorbed traces of the Aztec teachings, transforming the faith into something richer and more complex than the conquerors intended. The sun still rises, the rain still falls, and the earth still remembers. Perhaps it is not the gods we should fear, but those who claim to represent divine authority while destroying the knowledge and traditions of others. When we lift the veil of centuries, we see that the feathered serpent is not a liar, the jaguar not a tyrant, and the sun not a harbinger of death. They are symbols of life's power, its mystery, and its necessity. The true lesson is that evil wears many faces, and those who speak in the name of God are not always its voice. History shows us that the ones who survived in secret, the teachers who were called demons, still have much to teach. They whisper through stone and shadow, through story and memory, reminding us to question who truly wears the mask of evil and who carries the light. In the end, perhaps the gods were never the enemy. The empire that crucified them was. The Inquisition of the 16th century seemed like a distant horror, a chapter from the past, yet its echoes are still felt today. When Spanish priests burned codices, destroyed temples, and condemned entire belief systems, they believed they were protecting souls from the devil. They silenced the voices of shamans, elders, and artists, claiming the old gods were evil. Today, a different kind of inquisition has emerged, one that lives not in fire or steel, but in algorithms and screens. Indigenous spirituality, esoteric knowledge, and alternative ways of thinking are often censored, erased, or dismissed as misinformation. Social media platforms, search engines, and digital archives act as the modern inquisitors, deciding which ideas are allowed to flourish and which are buried. Like the priests of old, they claim authority over truth, but their power is exercised through control rather than confession. Ancient knowledge that survived centuries of conquest now faces the threat of invisibility in the digital realm. Sacred texts, rituals, and teachings are removed for being controversial or unverified, even when they carry profound wisdom about the natural world, consciousness, or the cycles of life. The parallels are striking. Just as missionaries once labeled the Aztec gods as demons, modern systems label indigenous and esoteric practices as superstition, fraud, or dangerous content. The old warnings about heresy have become warnings about harmful information. Communities that once hid their faith beneath the robes of Christian saints now find themselves navigating the invisible gates of digital approval. Even the scholars who once studied forbidden knowledge secretly must now encode their discoveries in ways that survive scrutiny, waiting for a future where understanding may once again flourish. Yet the spirit of resistance endures. Just as the Aztec gods survived beneath the surface of cathedrals and church altars, the teachings of indigenous peoples and mystics persist. They are shared privately, whispered among trusted circles, or hidden in ways that technology cannot fully erase. The story is not one of defeat, but of adaptation. The lesson of history is clear. When knowledge is threatened, it finds new forms to survive. And while algorithms may obscure, the human mind remembers. The sacred cycles of nature, the wisdom of the stars, and the teachings of those who came before continue to inspire. They remind us that authority does not equal truth, and suppression does not equal absence. The digital age may be the new Inquisition, but it cannot extinguish curiosity, memory, or the desire to seek understanding. The fire that once burned codices now flickers in screens, in whispers, and in the determination of those who refuse to forget. Every time someone preserves, studies, or shares the wisdom of indigenous cultures or hidden traditions, the pattern of censorship is challenged. The old gods, and the knowledge they carried, are still present. They wait quietly, teaching that even in a world of new powers and new rules, the pursuit of truth will always find a way to rise again. Beneath the stone floors of Mexico's grandest cathedrals, the old gods stir. Centuries of silence could not contain them. Centuries of conquest could not erase them, and centuries of fear could not silence their voices. They wait in the shadows of arches, in the cracks of walls, and in the whispers of wind that pass through ancient temples now hidden beneath modern cities. The feathered serpent coils quietly, the jaguar prowls unseen, and the sun warrior rises each morning, unseen yet felt in every ray of light. For generations, their presence was masked, hidden beneath the robes of saints and the painted faces of virgins. But now, their voice returns, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. Artists find themselves drawn to the colours of the sky and earth, creating murals and sculptures that echo the patterns of the old world. Dancers move through plazas in steps that recall the rhythm of the sun and moon, the heartbeat of life itself. Musicians play melodies that resonate with the cycles of time, songs older than the first cathedrals, yet still alive. The gods speak through the people who remember, who honour the sacred in ways both ancient and new. They awaken in rituals that blend Christian devotion with indigenous wisdom, in ceremonies that light fire and incense to the rhythms of the earth. Every chant, every drumbeat, every offering is a call to life, a reminder that the divine cannot be confined by walls or dogma. The church may have tried to bury them, but the gods always return through the creativity and devotion of those who honour them. In the streets, in markets, in hidden corners of villages, the gods awaken in the laughter of children, the work of artisans, and the prayers of those who know that the sacred is alive in the world around them. Even modern seekers feel their presence in dreams, visions, and the study of the stars. Quetzalcoatl whispers of wisdom, balance, and the awakening of consciousness. Huitzilopochtli reminds humanity of the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Tonantzin smiles from beneath the veil of Guadalupe, her presence guiding those who seek harmony with the earth. The stones themselves remember. The carvings, murals, and ruins speak to anyone willing to listen, teaching that faith is not limited to what is written or preached. It is experienced, felt, and lived. The gods awaken not to reclaim power, but to remind the world that the sacred has never left. It pulses beneath every step, every breath, and every heartbeat. As the sun rises over Mexico, it lights the faces of the old gods hidden beneath crosses and altars. They rise not in vengeance, but in harmony, a chorus of life and memory, teaching that even after centuries of suppression, devotion endures. Art, ritual, and consciousness become their voice once more, echoing through generations, carrying the wisdom of the past into the present. The gods have always been here. They have merely waited for the world to remember, and now they awaken.